Welcome to the United States of Tramerica, a podcast about how the institutions around us create trauma within us. I've been a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Missouri since 2014, and within the last 6 years, I've somehow stumbled into studying authoritarian governments, the erosion of democracy, and political psychology surrounding trauma and the susceptibility to following an authoritarian leader. I hope everyone's doing well. I hope spring has sprung wherever you are. Here in Missouri, it's 75 degrees today, which means it'll probably be 26 degrees by Saturday. Donald Trump was indicted yesterday, which is the first time a president has been indicted in American history. While this is a BFD, as Joe Biden once said, I'm actually not going to focus on that today, other than to say it's good for our democracy that he was, in fact, indicted. Legal systems are one of the first things to be overtaken when it comes to consolidating autocratic governments. So while it is a blemish on American history, the fact that we still have a functioning legal system is extremely important. I think realistically, it's not going to be a huge burden on Donald Trump. I think he'll do his perp walk. America will see his mugshot, and then he will bail out of jail and be free to live until his next court date. The legal system is slow and crawling at times, so I don't think this is going to be the exciting sitcom that people expect it is. This will likely go on for years as people try to figure out how to handle a president who's been indicted with crimes. So that's all I'll say about that. It's a good thing for our country, it's a good thing for democracy, and my biggest concern is what the QAnon fanatics and the MAGA crowd is willing to do in order to protect their president when they feel as though a huge injustice has been done. So, coincidentally, I was going to talk about childhood PTSD today. And then we just had the mass shooting in Nashville as well. And I'm gonna be bleak, and I'm gonna be morbid, and I'm going to say right now that nothing will change, and these children's names will be forgotten. Unfortunately, my very first thought was also that violence against the transgender community is only going to escalate even faster than it is now. Those who think being transgender is a mental disorder, even though let me be very clear it is not, will use this as a tool to further oppress and harm the population who is simply trying to live their lives. As a mental health professional, it is infuriating. While I wouldn't say I'm an expert in therapy within the LGBTQ community, I am always working to learn and do the best I can for the patients I've worked with who come in just wanting to be accepted. To clarify, gender dysphoria is in the DSM-5, but it is only diagnosed when the patient is experiencing turmoil or questions about their identity and who they want to be. We don't diagnose everyone with this just because they're transgender. We only diagnose it to the people who need help to figure themselves out more fully. You also have to consider why they feel the dysphoria. It could be because they're not accepted by their family. It could be because society as a whole and where they grow up, perhaps in the Midwest, perhaps in Southwest Missouri, don't accept them. And it's isolating and it's depressing. The shooter was transgender, but that has nothing to do with mental illness or the motives behind why they did the shooting. From a mental health perspective, it's alarming to see these laws and rules coming down on the LGBTQ population. And I fear this is only going to make it worse. So let's talk about childhood trauma, shall we? After all, there's a mass shooting in this country every single day. I'm interested in law and watch a lot of trials. At one point in the fall, there were 4 mass murder trials going on at the same time. One in Ohio where 8 people were murdered, the Parkland school shooting trial, and 2 of the Alex Jones trials with Sandy Hook. It's appalling and surreal and absurd. Trauma can be many things. It can be witnessing domestic abuse between your parents. It can be natural disasters. it can be car wrecks, it can be abuse, whether physical, sexual, or emotional. It can be bullying, it can be loss, it can be grief. It can be moving from foster home to foster home. There are so many things that cause trauma, and as I've mentioned in past podcasts, the earlier your trauma begins, the more likely you are to develop PTSD. There are studies of infants who have developed PTSD, and it's important to know that trauma in childhood actually changes the neurological functioning of your brain. It's not just that you can't get these horrible memories out of your head, it's that you are actually changed as a person and who you are and how you behave and how your brain makes connections to other things. So like I did with adult PTSD, let's go through the DSM-5 criteria of childhood post-traumatic stress disorder. And when I make a YouTube video for this, I will put what I'm reading on the slides so that you can perhaps better understand what I'm looking at and where I'm going with this. In post-traumatic stress disorder with children under 6 years old, in order to meet criteria for the diagnosis, they have to have had exposure to actual death or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence in one or more of the following ways. It can be either by directly experiencing the trauma to themselves, witnessing in person the event as it occurred to others, especially their caregivers, learning that something traumatic happened to one of their caregivers or parents. Secondly, there are intrusion symptoms which have to occur, and the child has to present with one or more of the following: recurrent, involuntary, and intrusive distressing memories or thoughts of the traumatic event. The child can't get whatever happened out of their head, and it's impacting their daily life. It's so important to watch how children play. Play is a child's language. So in all likelihood, the intrusive thoughts will come out in the way that they play, the way that they draw things, the way that they interact with other kids. While I am not a registered play therapist, play is the best way to unlock a child's deepest emotions. Additionally, the intrusive symptoms may also appear in sleep disturbances, not sleeping at all, not sleeping at night, but sleeping during the day instead. The child may have dissociative symptoms such as flashbacks, in which the child feels or acts as if the traumatic event were reoccurring again. Dissociation is a topic in and of itself, but the younger a child starts doing this, the more likely it is to be problematic. It's a natural thing that kids do when they're going through something hard. They make believe, they go to a safe world in their mind, or they go to a complete emptiness where nothing can harm them. At the most extreme end of the dissociative spectrum comes dissociative identity disorder, which used to be called multiple personality disorder. There could be entire episodes about this on its own, but the more severe and the more frequent trauma that a child goes through, the more likely they are to dissociate, fantasize, and create separate alters within themselves that can handle the pain that they're going through. Everyone dissociates to some degree and our brains get overloaded. Have you ever been driving down the highway and you just completely miss your exit because you're not even paying attention or thinking about anything? That's dissociation. It becomes problematic, though, if it's severe enough that we start losing chunks of time or become unaware of what we're doing while we're dissociating. And the point is, the younger these dissociative experiences begin, and they happen automatically because nobody tells a child to do this. The child is just trying to protect themselves from the harm being inflicted on them. But the earlier it starts, the more severe it tends to be. For the child, there can also be intense psychological distress at exposure to internal or external reminders of the traumatic event. These are your typical triggers. For instance, a little girl who gets in a car wreck will no longer sit in her car seat without having extreme distress. There are also physiological responses that a child may experience when reminded of the traumatic traumatic event. They may regress in their learning and their developmental abilities. Very young children may lose their ability to be toilet trained. Wetting the bed is very, very common, especially in sexual abuse. The child may persistently avoid stimuli of activities, places, or physical reminders of the event, or they may avoid people, conversations, and other interpersonal situations which remind them of the event. There's a substantially increased frequency of negative emotions, such as fear, guilt, shame, or confusion. They may also withdraw completely and stop participating in fun activities, play, or become socially withdrawn from adults and their peers. They find it harder and harder to display positive emotions and may have irritable behavior and angry outbursts with little or no provocation, which typically comes through as verbal or physical aggression towards people or objects. Like adults, there may be hypervigilance involved, in which the child is always on the lookout for danger and something bad happening. They may also have an exaggerated startle reflex or appear jumpy anytime there's a loud noise, a situation, or a sudden movement which they are not expecting. It's also especially important to look for what's called depersonalization and derealization. Depersonalization is the feeling of being detached from the world, as if you're an outside observer of it. You may feel like you're living in a dream, or you may have an out-of-body experience in which you feel as though you're watching yourself from a third-person perspective. Derealization is similar, as it feels as though there's an unreality of the surrounding world, and the individual's life experiences seem unreal, dreamlike, distant, or distorted. Again, dissociation is a coping skill for when our brains get overwhelmed by things. So it's not inherently bad, but it can lead to a lot of other mental health struggles as the person gets older. My hope in an ideal world would be that every parent protects their kids from trauma, although things happen that you still don't even have control over, even if you're the best parent on earth. You don't always have control of car accidents. You don't always have control of natural disasters, and you certainly don't have control over what other people do to your child. PTSD in small children is real, and unfortunately, the more they experience at an early age, it snowballs on itself and can become a massive problem. So I know that was some heavy stuff there, and it's sad that kids are being traumatized by various things every day. But what I love about working with trauma is it's also very healable. There are some mental health diagnoses that don't have a lot of good outcome to them. For instance, schizophrenia is a lifelong thing that is very hard to live with. But trauma is very treatable. The only scary thing is you have to be brave enough to be willing to face your monsters once and for all. So I want to thank everybody for listening. I'll be back in a couple weeks. I don't know what the topic will be at that time, but I appreciate everyone who listens, and I will see you in a few weeks. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/USTraumaPod. Email me at ustraumapod@gmail.com. Find me on Twitter at USTraumaPod. And if you like what I do and would like to support the cause, I have a Patreon, which is patreon.com/USTraumapod.